Overwatch 2, Overwatch 2, the phrase on everyone's lips right now. Why are people excited, concerned, throwing the phrase around, and what could it actually mean? Hey and welcome. I'm Hammeh, and after some tweets from developers and a Kotaku article discussing the cancellation of what seems to have been a couple of in-development Blizzard projects with leaks or quotes from anonymous Blizzard staff, the Overwatch community is awash with discussing Overwatch 2 as a concept quoted alongside this. Now in this video, I'm going to take a step back and we're going to have a look at the background, what's going on, where this has come from, my take on what it means. Overwatch 2 as a phrase is probably not indicative of what we'll actually see, and then what this new in-development Overwatch game could actually be from what we know already and have known for the last year, and just what might make sense. Now, timecodes in the descriptions below if you want to skip as always. So what's the news? Where has all this come from? Well, the cancellation of an in-development game at Blizzard has started this whirring off. Now, two different sources here. Firstly, news coming out that a game was cancelled via the Twitter of one David Gibson. You might know him as Poodle Time, an animator at Blizzard that has done loads of great work on Overwatch and indeed another project that's been cancelled according to his tweet over the last couple of years. The footage I'm showing here is part of his showreel that he's linked on his Twitter, and I have linked in the descriptions below, so please do go check it out, and if you like his work, do go give him a shout. We have to remember that games being partially developed at Blizzard and indeed in the wider games industry before being canned or cancelled, before announced most of the time, is fairly common as part of a production process. What led a layer on top of this was Jason Schreier replying to Gibson's tweet and then sharing an article on Kotaku later discussing Blizzard cancelling a StarCraft-themed FPS first-person shooter to focus on Diablo 4 and in quotes what he calls another project as Overwatch 2. If you're not familiar with Schreier's work, well, he's one of a few people doing investigative journalism out there in the games industry in the more traditional sense of the term, investigating the good, the bad and the ugly going around the games industry and the games and companies that make the games that we love and play. He's recently covered what went wrong behind the scenes perhaps at BioWare with Anthem and much more. Now, Schreier has a reputation for taking care with his sources. He seems to have a lot of trust from people opening up and talking to him from within various studios, and his articles recently of this kind of nature more often than not have been on the money or thereabouts. So your mileage may vary, but I'd say in general, it feels pretty trustworthy in terms of the general details of what he's talking about here. Now, the mention of a new Overwatch game in development and Schreier using the term Overwatch 2, we have to take that as just a general term, whether it's what he was told by his sources, it's his actual choice for something to call it to protect his sources, but this Overwatch 2 use has got everyone speculating away from the article. And some folks are rather concerned at the idea. Fix Overwatch first, amongst other things they cry. What will this do for esports, say others. Don't read too much into what it's been dubbed by various people for the time being. Now, outside of Mr. Schreier's article, a new Overwatch game being worked on, if you've been covering Overwatch for the last 3 years and beyond, it's probably been more of a question of timing rather than whether if it was being worked on. So if you're a fan, no massive surprise. I've mentioned things in previous videos such as hiring patterns. I mean, the Overwatch team has had 2 Overwatch dedicated writers hired over the last year to work with Michael Chu. You don't hire writers dedicated to a particular game, and bear in mind that Blizzard does have a kind of cross-game, cross-franchise writing and creative team. Overwatch has 2 extra dedicated writers in the last year. You don't do that if you're either not making more lore or you're not working on something behind the scenes, maybe a new game, a new project that requires more Overwatch writers. We also have seen that backed up with sort of public-facing public relations. So in a recent interview at the end of May, the president of Blizzard, J. Allen Brack, had an interview where he said that a lot of different types of games could exist from and in IPs that we have. If we think about the Overwatch IP, for example, it's extremely large and extremely all-encompassing. The game people experience today is just a very small part of what that IP could be. We've seen it with Warcraft, being a real-time strategy game, an MMO, Hearthstone is a card game. There have been other projects that have been in the Warcraft experience that haven't even made it to the market, and we think that all of these franchises have the ability to have lots of different games. So that is a very, very, very obvious discussion saying that Overwatch is going to be expanded, or Blizzard are thinking of, or indeed working on expanding Overwatch into other areas. Overwatch is called out multiple specific times by Brack in this interview with Game Informer. So with all of these little long-running and shorter-term signs, even before the Kotaku article, Schreier's sources actually talk about the nature of this game, which is something that even if we could speculate that an Overwatch game was coming, we haven't known anything about what it specifically could be about so far. Now, Schreier says that from what he has heard about Overwatch 2 further on in his article, it'll have a large PvE PvE element. Player versus entity, we're thinking about things there really in the phrase of like archives, you know, us fighting the computer rather than the player versus player fighting of Overwatch. A couple of Blizzard people have apparently compared it to Left 4 Dead. Now that excites me a lot. That's where all of this has come from. That's the background to this. Now, what could all of this actually mean? What can we take from this? Well, firstly, I want to allay people's fears, just from my own sort of point of view, about people taking this name Overwatch 2 from this article really, really literally. If you look more at the J. Allen Brack interview, and Brack talking about lots of Blizzard franchises being able to be different types of games and experience, I think that's what Overwatch, or this new Overwatch game, is going to be. Not an Overwatch 2. It's not going to be called Overwatch 2. I really don't think that this new Overwatch game is anything really hugely close in terms of being like another team-based online competitive shooter like it is currently, and there are several reasons why I think that just doesn't make sense. Firstly, if you look at the Blizzard team's development of Overwatch over the last 3/4 of a year or so, there's been a lot of quality of life time investment. Now, there was an announcement, a sort of bit of discussion and things from Jeff later in 2018 that seasonal events were going to stay broadly similar while they sort of worked on some features. Have a look at 2019 thus far. We've had Bastard, the short story and event. We've had something a little bit different in terms of story and things there. We've had the workshop very recently. We also have replays as well, and the replay functionality. Then Jeff, in a recent interview with Stylosa, said that the normal release schedule of events that we were used to, kind of like Hero Map, and similar, was going to get a bit mixed up this summer. There's a lot of investment if you were just going to make a new iteration of something very similar to what Overwatch is right now. So if you were just going to say, oh, we're going to make Overwatch all over again, but we're going to get rid of Ultimates or something like that, you know, like take the core game and then make gameplay changes and then release it as a completely new shooter in a way like, let's say, from a Destiny 1 to a Destiny 2 type iteration. I don't really think it's going to be that. I think that the Blizzard team have put too much sort of quality of life investment in tools that will mean that they're there for Overwatch for quite a long time to sort of be throwing them away for another game in like a year or a couple of years. It just doesn't make sense to me. The next factor for me is the esports or competitive side of things. I mean, Blizzard have made a huge investment in the Overwatch League for years to come. A second close replica or iteration would kind of put a spanner in that. Teams would have to relearn and adjust to the new game and a lot of different things. Now, Blizzard have history of this. They've split their esports and competitive community with one of their own titles, expanding it, changing the game before. Going back many, many years, StarCraft that had Brood War as an expansion, which then kind of split its player base a bit. And a lot of the Overwatch community in the competitive side of things have been saying, well, this makes no sense. Why would you split your community across a couple of different competitive games? That's, I really think, it's not going to happen. So for people worrying about an Overwatch 2 being something very similar to a current Overwatch, playing the same kind of modes, playing the same kind of ladder that we are right now, I just don't think it's going to be that. I think more of Overwatch following a trajectory, you know, a broad trajectory of something like CSGO. Counter-Strike Global Offensive has been around for years. It's always been a paid game, even though that game sort of went from being a full price game, shall we say, to being sort of £5 on sale, £10 in total. But the stability of having that one game that's been patched, tweaked, there's been new weapons, tweaks and balance over many, many years has meant that a competitive scene can grow and foster and be stable and continue. So I'd look at Overwatch as staying the way it is now, as a product, as a game, as a competitive ecosystem, as the Overwatch League, more on that kind of CSGO, very continuous, steady, improved, iterated, added to game kind of level, much like sort of any major MOBA and things like that right now. Now, as Valve have released sort of, you know, no different CSGO versions until the big change of it going free to play recently, I don't think Blizzard will do anything like that for Overwatch for many, many years to come. Other games can explore different experiences, different areas of the world. They could be based on this existing Overwatch engine, they could actually even still be a shooter, but they're not going to be just another reproduction of what we have now with changes and tweaks, I think. What could Overwatch 2 finally actually be? Let's have a little bit of fun speculation to finish off. Here's my most to least likely. Now, I most likely think it's going to be some kind of major release, a new genre or an aspect of the game on PC and console. Jason Schreier's Kotaku article compared it to being like a PvE Left 4 Dead. That apparently being quote from anonymous sources within Blizzard, call them leaks if you will. So I think that there's always been a demand for Overwatch PvE fighting. Everyone loves sort of the PvE events, everyone loves the storytelling, and they said, can't they be on all year? And Blizzard have actually talked multiple times about how the Overwatch engine in its current form is not really being built for this. They've said this pretty much since Overwatch released. When I was very fortunate to go and have a look at Retribution and the first Archives event last year at Blizzard HQ, we got to sit down in sort of round tables talking to some of the developers, and it was sort of said that, as it had been by Jeff in sort of various public dev videos and things, and the past that to do sort of a different kind of Overwatch in that kind of way and do it justice, Blizzard felt they'd actually have to make a new game. And that's been actually consistent, and Blizzard have said that for a few years. So I think that this is most likely, without any inside knowledge, going to be that kind of game. It's going to take the Overwatch existing engine, and we're going to have some kind of sort of PvE mode. You know, it could be a story mode, it could be an Overwatch story game. You could be fighting in a first-person view in the way that we are right now. There could be extra things added onto that. It could take the core engine, tweak it, or it could be some kind of different game. But it's not going to be a PvP online fighting game, a team-based shooter game that Overwatch is now. It could just be a big story mode game. And you know what? That'd be absolutely great. Hey, as a lore fan, as you know, if you've watched my channel for any length of time, I'd absolutely love that. And you know what? It could also be, whether it's a fully fledged project, let's say, I don't know if it's a story game, how long could it be? Could it be a 15, 20, 25 hour sort of long game in terms of the missions and variety of stuff we do? But don't rule out some kind of maybe expansion, but it could be just a solely single player story based perhaps expansion, which is maybe slightly lower price than a full fat game as well. Although if it's a fully PvE, story-based, single-player Overwatch game, whether it's based on the existing FPS engine or not, I would absolutely love that. But I think a project of this nature is probably the most likely thing right now in terms of speculation. With Schreier's mentioning of Left 4 Dead, if you ever played Left 4 Dead, and I've had some of this footage behind that, this kind of co-op, telling stories, playing through levels with the voice work and interactions that we've come to expect from Archives events along the way. This could be a really good way of telling more Overwatch story. You could have Overwatch the Omnic Crisis, where you play through the Omnic Crisis, or Overwatch the Downfall of Overwatch. If Blizzard make this game with all of these different worlds and levels and textures in, we could see these levels being brought to Overwatch the shooter game separately. Complete speculation in future as well. You know, adapted levels maybe for competitive and things like that. My second bet for what could be announced is another kind of Overwatch game entirely, and I'm saying step away from the FPS engine that Blizzard currently have, just something entirely different. Visual novels. I've championed this idea for quite some time, and I know I'm not the only one. Now obviously I like my lore and story. This footage is from Telltale's Game of Thrones, but you know the kind of game I mean. It could be anything from Tales from the Borderlands, Valhalla, Cyberpunk, bartending, Doki Doki Literature Club. I've never played it, but I'm aware of it. But you all know that kind of style. A play-along story game with branching narrative, decisions, consequences, story paths, a bit of quick time or light puzzling live event action. I think that could be a great way of expanding the Overwatch world and universe in a different way. I think it would really, really suit Overwatch, and if it's not this announcement, that's something that I could see as a different format of game that Overwatch could explore in future. Maybe it would be a bit quicker to produce. Maybe it could be episodic, for example, much like you know, Telltale's The Walking Dead and things like that. A bit less likely right now, perhaps, but we could see it in future. It could work as another lore and story medium very, very nicely. And this is probably least likely, I think. I'm going to put mobile. It's a very long shot for this BlizzCon, but what I would say is let's not throw all mobile or mobile playable games directly in the bin. Now, if an Overwatch mobile game was what they announced at BlizzCon 2019, and in the way of Diablo Immortal last BlizzCon, hyping up a big announcement and then making it a mobile title, I can see people getting upset. Mobile games in and of themselves, if made right, are not inherently bad. Two games I have enjoyed on and off, I've just started playing again, Pokemon Go. Also, Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms. A lot of fun I have with that as well as my first-person shooters, me playing World of Warcraft, MMOs, real-time strategy games, all kinds of stuff. Love all kinds of games. So my point is here, if there is an Overwatch mobile game in future, I don't think it's going to be this announcement, but let's give it a chance if it does show up, or if it's something that's not an Overwatch PvE lore game, which I think all of us would love, an Overwatch sort of kind of co-op experience, even like Left 4 Dead. That sounds brilliant. But if it's not that, let's give it a go. What do you think it could be? Do you like any of these ideas? What do you think a new Overwatch, I don't like calling it Overwatch 2 as I've explained, could be? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Sorry I've been quiet for a while. Things have been very, very mad the last few months, but I should be getting going again now with a bunch of Overwatch videos. And then of course E3 is coming up, so I'm going to either be sharing some videos about that on this channel or elsewhere. So do let me know whether you'd like to see them on this channel or elsewhere. I've got my second channel, of course. Any games you'd like seeing covering, I've got my ideas already, and there'll be loads of Overwatch coming up here, as well as game lore and Blizzard lore, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.